Hey, howdy everybody, my name is John, and this is going to be the second video in my series on an introduction to Dicecloud version 2. If you haven't already seen the video that I put out last week, I'm going to say stop here, go back, and watch that video. The first half of that video goes over what Dicecloud version 2 even is, what it's capable of, and what its roadmap for the future is somewhat looking like. The second half of that video goes over how to install and use the Libraries of Vexus, and from that, how you can make a character. Today's video is going to kind of pick up where we left off. I'm going to start out by talking about a couple of things I forgot to last time. I'm going to talk about how to install patches if your sheet should break in the future for any updates on our end. Any common extensions that you might be interested in, as well as how to install them. Primarily, I'm going to be going over starting feats and conditions. I'm then going to get into how to build a custom race, because of course with the Libraries of Vexus you get access to, I think at this point, I think we've got all of the races covered, from the Player's Handbook, to Volos, to now Mordenkainen's. I think we've got all the races covered, but of course there's a plethora of homebrew races out there, and people are going to want to know how to make that. We're going to go over two ways to do that. The first way is through a developer's library by the name of Hexa. They have a method available in their developer library that has a very simple and straightforward way to build simple homebrew races. I'm also going to walk through how to build it in a way very similar to V1, which is just adding very explicitly to your sheet what the race has in store without needing to build a library, without even needing to enable your tree tab. In a future video, I'm going to look at a very, very complicated homebrew race and go over how I personally would go about doing that. But in order to get to that point, we're going to need probably in the order of 2 to 3 more videos. I'm planning on putting out one of these every week, time permitting. The next 2 to 3 videos are going to go over all of the property types that are available in V2. And once we collectively have an understanding of how those different properties function and interact with one another, then we can revisit these super complicated homebrew races and classes, and I can get you guys up to speed on how you can go about making those in a manner that lets V2 really show off everything it can do. So to end today's video, after we make the simple race, I'm going to go and show you guys how to enable the tree tab, which is currently hidden. And I'm going to show off the various types of properties and sort of break them down into 4 categories. And in the future, we'll explore each of those categories and the properties inside of them. Okay, so first off, I wanted to bring you guys and refocus your attention onto a character that's been built with LOV. It's totally filled out, and I just wanted to point out that you've got these cards that you're building with, and at any time, if you don't want to see them, you can click this X. That doesn't mean they're gone, and there's 2 ways to get them back. The first way is just clicking on this little ghost icon here, this little like sort of ghosted file. Click on that and it shows you everything that you've clicked an X on. And also you'll notice there are some things in here like sources, and when you click on it, it just brings it up out of the etherealness back into the front and center here. You'll notice that there are some things like sources that you might not have pressed the X on. That's because we just pressed the X for you when you installed the base, because we don't anticipate most users are going to be interacting with these. But if I wanted to get my stats back up, I could just do that and resurrect it. The other way to do it is by expanding this, and this is your entire build. This is everything you've added to your character sheet. And if you want to change out an ASI, for example, you can do that. Pop back up here, add it back. I showed off all of this in the last video, but you can just edit it through here, click the X button. but I primarily just recommend going through the ghosted file menu here, the hidden properties menu. I wanted to go through the various hidden folders that we don't initially expose to you. Primarily the items, extensions, sources, and patches. Items is a very simple slot, very straightforward. All it does is it just gets you a list of every single item that we've ever made. It is essentially equivalent to going to your inventory, pressing plus item, and adding from a library. These are pretty much the same lists. I think there's some minor differences with this being a bit more broad. Like you can see we've got like the spell casting components. Those weren't available in the other menu. But yeah, if you need to add an item, this is just anything that's an item that's in our library. Next, we're going to skip extensions. We're going to go straight to sources. On the sources sheet, this is a list of all of the books, and I think I briefly mentioned in this last video, but this is a list of all of the actual like physical books that you're okay with getting content from. We have a default list installed, and if I go over here to this new sheet and pop out my sources, you can see this is all of the stuff we give you by default. And some of the stuff, like Baldur's Gate or Icewind Dale, might not come installed by default. Out of the Abyss isn't installed by default. If you want content from these books, you'll have to go into your sources and insert them. Just like that. And you can see a list of all of the sources that you do have. And by the way, here's a way you can get rid of stuff. Maybe your DM doesn't want you playing with Tasha's Cauldron. And you see, just get rid of it. And now all content that's from there is going to be hidden from you. And so, for example, let me actually swap out to Ranger here now that I've taken out Tasha's Cauldron. And here, favored enemy or favored foe. You'll see I only have favored enemy offered to me, and we see requirement of one property were not met. And you can see this is because show TCE, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, is orange, which just means it's evaluating to false. And if I wanted to fix that, I would go to my sources. I'd go and reinstall Tasha's, and now both of them are available. And so this is another thing. If you ever see an error like that, where you see a piece of orange text over here that starts with the word show and then a series of letters, those letters, by the way, are the abbreviations that are used on the 5e Tools website. We try to stay consistent with that. If you ever see an error like that, that probably means you don't have a matching source. Now, we're not perfect. There have been plenty of cases where we've typoed a conditional, or we don't have a source set up just right. But if you see that error, that's a good first place to look before going and reporting that as a bug. Okay, I think that's pretty good for sources. Moving on, let's talk about patches. So, Dicecloud is still in flux. Version 2 is still in flux. We've hit a feature freeze at this point, but things still can change. I don't think we're going to need this as much now, especially with a couple of the promised features we've had teased to us. But the way patches work is that if you have an old cheat and there's an update to Dicecloud or an update to the library that significantly overhauls something to the point where old cheats are no longer compatible with the library moving forward, we're going to send out a big announcement on the Discord. We'll ping everybody, and we'll tell you the instructions for how to install a patch. But generally what the process looks like is you show your patches folder through the hidden properties menu, and you just install the patch. And you'll note that all of these have little dates on them for how old your character sheet is to compare to. So for example, this sheet was made today. It's not February 25th, 2022. I don't need to install this. And so all of them have tags on them. But all of these patches, by the way, are just put in by default into the base, so that if you just make a new sheet, it'll already be patched with all of this stuff. We try to color code them with degrees of necessity, and so, for example, the class level fix and the sources fix were patches that entirely broke old sheets. If you had an old sheet, you just essentially couldn't level them up anymore because you didn't have these patches. This one was a huge one also. Honestly, probably should be colored orange just like these two. These two sort of lighter ones aren't really that necessary. This one's specifically for druids. This one specifically if you have a magic item that resets at a time point. Point is we're going to give you instructions, but this is kind of what that looks like, and I might put links to a timestamp at this point in the video to teach people how to install them. But it's really as simple as that. You just click this, you click insert, and now you're done, and your sheet should be patched. Okay, finally we've got extensions. I'm going to go over to my showcase sheet for this. There are a variety of extensions, and you're really only going to see these if you made your character and selected the developer and homebrew libraries. I think we've got one extension, maybe two extensions in the main ones, but most people's extensions are sitting in their dev libraries. And so I suggest enabling these. You're not going to accidentally add anything. So there's really no harm in just selecting these when you're making your character sheet in your biography. So the extensions, you pop it up and you get this big list, and you'll notice, by the way, that some patches are in here. This is because in the old days we actually didn't have a patches slot. We just had the extension slot, and this was the only way we could interact with old character sheets. And so you'll see these down here. It's not a very organized thing. It's very unofficial. We've got a lot of homebrew in here, like travel and exploration light. There's vampirism in here. Here's stress. But the main thing I wanted to show off were probably the three most commonly added extensions, which are conditions, expanded point by, and free feat. Admittedly, I haven't used expanded point by, and I don't really know what it's capable of. I presume it just gets rid of the costs, and that's what it looks like. Oh, it looks like it goes negative. All right, well, point is, and I'm sure I'm doing a terrible job, and I'm not giving enough credit to Hexa here, but if you want expanded point by, that's an option, and I'm sure there's a perfectly good explanation posted somewhere on the Dicecloud server. But conditions and free feat, I know all about, and I'll tell you about it right now. So let's select them. Let's press insert. We've got conditions and free feat now available to interact with. And I'm done adding extensions, so I'm going to hide that. Conditions, these are all of the conditions in 5e. You've got things like petrified, prone, unconscious. You've got exhaustion. You've got a whole bunch of homebrew stuff from my game, and I apologize. I should definitely move that out of my library and into a homebrew library. But all of these are exactly as they're described in the PHP. When you add them, they're added as buffs over here. And you can see that they do all the things they say they do. So if I look at my perception, you can see I've got a con ben here. I automatically fail ability checks that require hearing. I automatically fail ability checks that require sight. I can get rid of these. Charmed. Pretty straightforward. The one thing I do want to mention about the conditions is that I'm still not very happy with how I'm handling exhaustion, and this is why it's in a developer branch and not in the main branch right now. I'm thinking over different ways to handle this. I've been given a lot of suggestions. It's mainly just me not finding time to redo it. But if you add, let's say you have exhaustion level 4, what you don't do is this. You don't add all 4 up to exhaustion. Exhaustion level 4, if I expand this, it comes with all of the previous ones. So if I insert this, you'll actually see I just added 4. I've got 1 through 4 already. And if I delete 4, then they all go away. which is incorrect depending on your rules. And so you would go back here and you would add 3 if you just decreased your level. And this is probably one of the things I'm going to change. I'm probably going to make it a rolling counter, but for the time being, at the point of this video, which is October 23rd, then the exhaustion levels are combined when you add them to your sheet. That's conditions. Free feat is our other big popular extension. It's one of the most common house rules that you start with a free feat, and it really is as simple as that. You add the extension, you get the slot, free feat, gives you a feat. Simple as that. Right, so those are our common extensions. What I wanted to go over now was how to make a homebrew race. And so I'd say the way I would recommend for most people, if your race is really straightforward, and a lot of homebrew races are, a lot of homebrew races aren't as well, but that's the point of these videos. We're going to work up how to get to those really complex ones. But let me reshow my race here. If you go into race, you of course get all of the regular things, but if you subscribed to the developer branches when you made your character, then you've also got access to build a race, which is right in here. This is different than custom lineage. Custom lineage is very specifically the custom lineage rules provided in Tosh's Cauldron. Build a race is how you would go about making a custom race. And this gives you all of these options. It gives you your creature size, gives you your languages, racial features. These just are the common racial features. You've got your ASI, your +2, and your +1. And this is generally pretty good. Gets you most of what you need. However, I understand that's not going to be everything all the time. So what I wanted to do today is get rid of build a race, and I wanted to walk you guys through how I would go about making this penguin variant Aarakocra by myself in a manner very similar to how I would do it in version 1 of Dicecloud. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide this slot. Because we're not pulling anything from a library, because we're making this ourselves, we're not going to be interacting with the build card. The build card as a whole is really for pulling things from the library. If you're not using libraries, you're not going to be using the build card that much. In fact, we're going to be sticking to these, probably not even inventory. We're pretty much going to be sticking to features and stats for all of these. So let's take a look at our homebrew here. As an Aarakocra, you have certain traits in common with your people. Being able to swim at a high speed starting at first level is exceptionally effective in certain circumstances and exceedingly dangerous in others. As a result, playing an Aarakocra requires special consideration by your DM. Icy resilience. Due to these Aarakocra's origins of very icy landscapes and frigid waters, they exhibit a strong resilience towards cold environments. There is very little save the breath of a white dragon that can freeze these weather-hardened birdfolk. This character is resistant to cold damage. Okay, this is our first feature. How would I go about this? First things first, I'd go over here, I'd click the plus button on our feature page, and I'd add a feature. This feature is called Icy Resilience. So I'm just going to do a simple copy, paste. Then, just going to copy this. Now, personally, I like to keep all flavor in the description, and I like to keep only the utility in the summary. This is totally personal preference. Then I'm just going to click create. At this point, I'm going to go back and I'll give it a nice little icy color so I know that this is where it comes from. And now I need to actually give this resistance to cold damage property. The way I'm going to do that, I'm going to go to children and I'm going to click the plus button. And you can already see Dicecloud suggesting common things for features. It knows, oh, I didn't mean to click on that. It knows what things commonly come from features. And the thing we're looking for is a damage multiplier. Then we're going to give it, we're going to call it Icy Resilience, because that's the name of the feature. It's resistance to, I think it was cold damage. Yeah, cold damage. And then I click create. I also have these advanced options if I wanted to make it like cold damage from non-magical attacks. I did do that, but probably unnecessary. I mean, definitely unnecessary for this homebrew, but I wanted to let you know of that option. Okay, and now we're done with Icy Resilience. Next thing, Swift and Wise. Your dexterity score increases by 2, and your wisdom score increases by 1. And at this point, we've kind of hit a fork in the road on what do you want, or how auditable do you want your sheet to be. Personally, I'm okay with not making this a feature. Even though it's technically a feature, this is such a simple effect to implement that I really don't think it needs to be on the features page. So I'm just going to copy Swift and Wise. Dex up by 2, Wiz up by 1. How I'm going to do this, I go over to my stats page, because that's where my Dex and Wisdom are. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on, not Strength, on Dexterity. Click Edit, Children, and I'm going to add. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an effect. I'm going to call this Swift and Wise. And by the way, at this point you could add this to the child of a feature. You can make this the child of a note on your journal if you wanted. I'm adding it as a child of my dex because that's where I'm going to be looking for it when I'm auditing for why is my dex this number. But generally, you can make it the child of wherever you want, so long as you target dexterity here. And the value is +2, is that right? Yeah, +2. Cool. And I'm all happy with this. Close. And now you can see my dex has gone up, and I can see it's auditable here. This is where that +2 is coming from. You can do the same thing for wisdom. Edit, children, add, effect, value 1, stats, wisdom. You may ask really quickly, why do I need to specify wisdom when it's the child of wisdom? Well, because this effect is just a child of wisdom doesn't mean it's necessarily going to affect its parent. The hierarchy is fairly arbitrary. Once we get into super advanced stuff, I will show the ways in which you can interact with the hierarchy. But generally, all effects are going to target something, and where they are situated in the back end on the tree of your character doesn't really matter that much. And what matters is the targeting fields. And so in this case, we're targeting wisdom. Press create, Swift and Wise. Now you can see our wisdom has gone up, and that's why. Okay, next up, age. Aircock will reach maturity by age 3 compared to humans. Okay, this is purely lore. You can choose to put this wherever you want. I'm going to make it a note because I think that's probably what's best for me. So I'm going to go over to journal. I might choose to put it in my personality description, but I'm just going to do this. I'm going to do race info, and then I'm going to use some markdown to just make this clear. Alignment and size, all of these are more lore based, and I'm going to follow the format that we use for all other races that we have in the Libraries of Vexus, which is just putting all of this stuff in a note on your journal page. Press create, color it my Aarakocra color, which was this. If you add 2 spaces at the end of a line, it'll automatically add a new line, and so there we go. Looks nice now. Okay, next up, waddles. My base walking speed is 25 feet. So to implement that, I'm going to go over to, probably I would put it under the child of speed. Children, add effect. Call it waddles. I'm going to add a value of 25. I'm going to target 2 stats here. The first one is speed, and the second one is unmodified speed. Now, unmodified speed shouldn't matter unless you're a druid. If you're a druid, unmodified speed is how we do some calculations when you're wild shaped for what your speed should be. But if you just do speed, that should generally be fine. But because you're watching this video and you want to do it properly, do both. Press create. Okay. I'm back. Hello. I apologize. I was banging my head against the table because I was trying to figure out why this wasn't working. Turns out, and I'm going to leave this in because You might be banging your head against the table if I don't leave this in and explain why is my speed still 0? I set it to 25. Because the sheet thinks we're unconscious right now. And the reason it thinks we're unconscious is because we have 0 health. Because we haven't set our health yet. And that is because I never actually added a class. So let's just very quickly add in first level artificer. Give it a second. Okay, there we are. Ooh, artificer's a bulky class. Now we have hit points, now we have speed. Everything makes sense now. Fantastic. Wanted to leave that in. Next up, back to our homebrew. Aquatic, you have a swimming speed of 50 feet. To use this speed, you can't be wearing medium or heavy armor. Okay, this is a bit more in-depth. I think this is probably the most, yeah, it is. It's the most in-depth thing we're going to have to add to this one. Specifically because of this weird conditional. So we've made this pretty easy for you. And so if I go over here really quick to another character I've built, I've got chainmail on, and you can see that it comes with this constant of heavy armor equipped. And we're going to be able to use this. So we're going to go over here. We're going to go back to our showcase sheet. I'm going to go back to speed, and I'm going to add a new child to it. Except this child is not going to be in effect. We're going to add a toggle, and this is how you evaluate conditionals in V2. Now, of course, if you wanted to, you could just make this a feature, just like you would in V1, and just write down that this wouldn't count if you had medium or heavy armor. But this is V2, and I want you guys to know how to be able to use it. And so this is a really easy feature to implement, so I'm going to show you how to implement it. Some other features you're not going to know how to implement, and that's what the point of the next, 4 to 5 videos are going to be. But this one's simple. We're going to add a toggle. We're going to call it, what's it called? Aquatic. I don't need a variable name for it, but just in case, I'll add aquatic toggle. I'm not going to show it on the character sheet. If I wanted to, that'd just let you interact with it manually, but we're going to calculate it. The condition we're going to use is not heavy armor equipped and not medium armor equipped. I go ahead and create that. Just test. You can see that it is currently evaluating it true because I don't have medium or heavy armor equipped. And then I'm going to add that effect below here. The effect is going to be... Actually, it's not an effect. This, because it's a swimming speed, this doesn't come inherently on your sheet. Speed is because we expect everything to have a speed, but not nearly as many things have a swimming speed, and we want to keep these sheets as light as possible so that they're easy to manipulate, fast to calculate, and interact with the API very well. So in this case, we're going to add an attribute, which is just sort of a general variable that's displayed on your sheet. Again, we'll get into this further in a later video. Base value, 50. Name, swimming speed. Variable name, swim speed. If you want a list of all of the variable names that we use, again, you can set this to whatever you want. But if you wanted to interact with our stuff, maybe you get a magic item which doubles your swim speed. That's only going to work if you use the same swim speed variable as us. We have a spreadsheet that we try to keep up to date with all of the variable names we use and you can just Control F swimming speed, and it'll show that we use swim speed in camel case for our variable name. Type, it's going to be a stat. It's not an ability score or any of these other things. Description, we don't need a description. I mean, if you wanted to, you could say comes from aquatic, just to show a bit of origin there. And now we've got our swimming speed down here. Fantastic. Okay. Finally, oh, actually, and I wanted to prove something to you guys really quick. If I add a plate, if I add plate armor and I equip it, you'll notice my swim speed goes away. If I come over here and I unequip it, swim speed comes back. That's fantastic. You couldn't do that in V1. You can do it in V2. It's really cool. Okay, final thing. Languages. You can speak, read, and write Common, Aarakocra, and Aquan. Super easy. Here's how we're going to handle this. I'm going to add a skill. We're going to create a skill. Common, Aarakocra, Aarakocra Aquan. Common language. Let me just copy this. Ability, it's not tied to an ability. This would be like if you had a skill like acrobatics and you wanted to tie it to strength, but it's a language, it's not. Create. We're not proficient in it. Let's fix that. There are two ways you can do this. The first way is you can go in here, you can add a proficiency through the skills, or the way I prefer, just go in here, set your base proficiency to proficient. Cool, done. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. And then I'm going to duplicate it again. And you may be saying, John, you still only have one down here. That's because Dicecloud is currently hiding duplicate things, but they're actually all here, and you can see them all here. So let me just click on this, and next one was, I have the memory of a 2-year-old, Aarakocra. Cool, done, and now it's popped in as expected, and our final one, Aquan. Cool. And there's all of our languages. Cool, and I think that's it for this. I think now we have all of this, and I mean, one thing you might want to do to demonstrate this is click on the race and add the child here of just like a note or a folder or a slot filler. Actually, slot filler. Okay, we're just gonna say penguin Aarakocra, and we'll get a penguin icon. Press create. By the way, this has no purpose. All it does is it just fills that so that if we want to audit our build, we can see that we're a penguin Aarakocra. And everything I've been adding through the stats and features page and the journal page, you could also just make all of those children of this guy if you wanted to. Just go through children, add your properties here. But this, adding the features through the actual individual pages, is going to feel a lot more familiar for people who are already using version 1. Okay, now, that covers custom races, that covers extensions, patches. I want to show off one final thing and give a final note before I end this week's video, which is how to enable the tree tab. If you click on Edit Details here, you've got a whole bunch of settings and even more settings down here, and there's a toggle here called Show Tree Tab. This is how you get into the back end of your character. You press Show Tree Tab, you get this new tab. And here's where you can see the total hierarchy of everything inside of your character sheet. You can find all of the properties that compose your character sheet here. And if you really want to start building super intricate things, super involved homebrew races and classes, you're primarily going to be wanting to work in the tree tab, just because you can actually mess with the hierarchies by clicking organize here. You can make things children of each other. It's a really useful thing to be able to do. Also, this is the only tab where you have access to adding any property you want at any time. Final thing I'm going to go over is I'm just going to break up all of these properties into subgroups. There are 4 main types of properties in Dicecloud v2. And within those properties, within those types of properties, all of the individual properties that you have available to you are just kind of different expressions of that major grouping. But they all follow the same sort of behavioral constants. Those 4 groups are permanent properties, transient properties, triggering properties, and what I'm just going to call miscellaneous properties because they just kind of don't fit in anywhere else. Within the permanent properties, you've got attributes, classes, class levels, constants, containers, damage multipliers, effects, features, items, notes, point buy arrays, proficiencies, skills, spell lists, and toggles. All of these things are properties that just sit on your sheet and constantly are evaluated. Especially when it comes to toggles, like I was showing off with the armor toggle earlier. That toggle gets changed immediately as soon as I equip armor or unequip it. Either way, it's something that just sits on our sheet and is there constantly being evaluated. The sort of counterpart to this are the transient properties. These include attribute damage, remove buff, branches, damage, rolls, and saving throws. All of these things are things that only exist on your character sheet instantaneously. When you make a roll property, that it rolls a number in your action log and then basically stops existing. There are ways you can pull that information out, but it's very, very transient, and that's why I'm calling this group transient properties. The remove buff property, all it does is it just instantaneously activates and it removes the buff property. It doesn't sit on your sheet. You can't look at it at any point. I mean, you can see the property, but my point, all of these things are things that are activated, like a roll or like when you deal damage to something. Like, you can see that the damage property is there, but it actually only manifests itself instantaneously when you deal that damage. All transient properties need something to activate them. And this is that third category, the triggering actions. And there are 3 triggering actions. There's actions, and this is what you mainly use. There are all of these buttons here. All of the buttons are actions. Spells, when you cast a spell, you can trigger other things. And the trigger property, aptly named. The trigger property, which sort of can just chain react with other triggers. You just specify when something happens on the sheet that it acts like you activated an action. Finally, there are the miscellaneous properties. These kind of don't fit well or fit into multiple of the other 3 categories. The first one is the buff. The buff is weird because it's the bridge between transient and permanent. When it's triggered by an action, a spell, or a trigger, it instantaneously manifests, but then it sticks around until either a remove buff is activated that targets that buff, or player presses the trash can button on the stats page. But children of the buff aren't realized until the buff is sort of instantaneously summoned onto your sheet by a trigger. The next miscellaneous feature is the folder, and the reason I call this a miscellaneous feature is because it doesn't do anything on your sheet. It's really only for organizational purposes. Recently, it's been given its first actual use that is beyond just being more organized on your sheet, which is that if you put a whole bunch of stuff inside of a folder and then make the folder the child of an action, it's going to hide all of that. So if I go over here, you can see, actually the sheet's pretty good. But every now and then on these actions, you can see the children of it. And so here, I've got 2 here. If I put these inside of a folder, it would hide both of them. But the folder, I mean, it's technically a permanent property, but because it doesn't do anything, I've put it in miscellaneous. The next one isn't on here. It's only available to library creators, and it's called a reference. And what a reference does is it targets a different property in some other library, and the moment a reference is loaded onto a sheet, it immediately replaces itself with whatever its reference property was. And so it's definitely miscellaneous because it's never on a sheet whatsoever. The next one is a slot, which is, again, technically a permanent property, but I don't want to put it in the same group because it's never useful for actually just like building a character beyond library creators giving you ways to pull stuff from their library. What a slot does is it's those boxes you see on your build trees. It lets you pull things from libraries. And the counterpart to that is the slot filler, which usually you will find in libraries. I don't know why you would ever add one to your sheet beyond what I showed you earlier, which is just for auditing purposes. A slot filler usually exists in a library. A slot filler has the ability to mimic the appearance of any other property. It can't mimic the function of other properties, but it can mimic the appearance of other properties, and it can be slotted into slots. So those are the 4 subgroups of properties, and I hope to be publishing videos over the next month diving into each of those subgroups, talking about all of the properties that are part of those groups, what they're useful for, and how to use them. After we get through those, I'm going to put together a video where I start showing off how to use them all together to build super complicated homebrew stuff. All right, we're 45 minutes in. I definitely cut some parts out of this because I blundered certain parts of this, but I imagine we're probably still around 45 minutes, probably 40, 45 minutes. I'm going to wrap up the video now. If you have any questions whatsoever, either leave them in the comments or join the Discord and just ping me there. Once again, I'm going to implore you to share this video with anyone you know who's trying to get into using V2, who wants to use some homebrew races, doesn't know how. This video is for them. Otherwise, I hope you found this video informative and helpful, and I hope you're looking forward to the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.